Hey there, folks. Thanks for joining us again for yet another wonderful episode of the 2XLabs podcast. You can get CEUs from these podcasts, y'all. I just want you to remember that. I'm going to say it out the gate in the beginning of these episodes. I'm going to say it at the end. I'm going to say it all the time. I have a wonderful human being sitting with me today. I am your host, Dr. Erica Miley, and we're going to have a wild conversation today, which I'm really excited to have, that is influenced by TikTok. Thank you, Kayla Bell, who is a licensed mental health therapist who specializes in internal family systems therapy and is the director of the Counseling Center at Drake University, Iowa. Kayla, really, thanks for being mutuals with me on TikTok, but also thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. This is going to be a fruitful conversation for sure.
At minimum, they're going to be comments on the internet.
It's not a popular take. I know that. So
I just loved how you phrased it. So essentially, this conversation started because we are mutuals on TikTok, and you asked a question in a video that we're going to go deeper on today because the comments were wild. That we all know that capitalism impacts so many different professions, of course, particularly in therapy. It's really uncomfortable for therapists to talk about. Can you talk about sharing the question you asked on TikTok, but also like, what are some of these comments that you got?
Yeah, absolutely. First, let me mention that I am speaking on behalf of Kayla Bell-Consolver and not on behalf of any of the institutions that I represent. But the specific question, which I thought was a fair question, was how do we as counselors contribute to capitalism, right? I mean, and the idea that, you know, we can in our systems profit off of the pain of others. In order to see us, you must have some kind of condition, be struggling. And if we are not taking that into consideration, we are literally profiting off of the pain of others. So let's diversify how we do things. And the comments, which I thought was fair, I was like, yeah, let's actually think about ways to ensure we're not causing harm and not seeing people as just, you know, customers. Was stay out of my pocket.
Correct.
You know, but private practice is so much better. Like, you don't understand. But the stay out of my pockets was said in so many diverse ways possible. I'm doing what's best for me. Like, it pretty much pushing against the narrative. And I was like, I think I'm in agreement with you all, because I'm saying, like, yes, we don't want you overworked and burned out. And the system in which many people practice private practice does profit off of pain. Like, there's so many nuances. It's a business model, not a mental health model. You know, so at the practice, the service is mental health, but the product, business is not.
Right. And it's especially how our healthcare system operates. This rub of capitalism requires all of us to make decisions about how we work so that we can feed ourselves, so that we can feed our kids, so that we can spoil our pets, so that we can do all the things that we need to do in our lives, but that it does make it a very specific decision that you have to make because of how our system is created. And I think all you did was say, hey, like, why are we not having this conversation about what does this look like? You didn't say anything about private practice, but they felt threatened. They felt threatened about private practice. I am in private practice, and I did not feel threatened from your question. I think it is a worthy question. I wonder, it's almost like we are conditioned to believe that the only way to succeed in therapy is to work ourselves to the bone, fill as many slots as possible.
Yes.
And it doesn't come from most of us when we went to graduate school to become helpers in some way. There was another reason and reasons that we did it. It wasn't, we didn't look down the pipe and go, you know what, I'm going to make the most money in the world. That's just what I want to do. I want to make all of the money. But this dichotomy, how do you think that mindset impacts therapist well-being in your experience?
It is pretty low, because what ends up happening is that they feel like they're not a good enough therapist. And also it like creates more stress, because I see so many counselors struggle with pricing. Like, they're like, oh, I should be, right? This is the part that I think that bothers me the most. And they say, you need to charge your worth. I was like, worth is so subjective, because if someone charges more sliding scales, does that mean their worth is less? Someone who charges $350 an hour, Like, it's just so subjective. And that was actually some of the comments that I got, is that I wanted therapists to be poor. And I was like, I don't actually. I want you all to be able to take care of yourself, just to think about this. But I think what ends up happening is there's such a comparison trap. Everyone's comparing their prices to someone else, not actually what is needed for their own life, for their business, and the people they serve. So then we really get in this capitalism as a mindset, because I think what they missed, what I was saying, is capitalism is the system in which the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. If someone cannot afford their rent, and there was a comment that like really hit my heart. She said, I moved in with somebody else because I love therapy so much, but I couldn't afford my rent. So I moved in with someone else so I could...
For how expensive our education is?
Yeah, you know. So in my mind, I was like, that's why I was like, we're missing something here. Right? And that's what kind of shied me away from the model. And I think why I really like working in a college, because it's free services and it's less that I have to think about. But that really touched me. It's like, someone is like, I can't pay for food or gas, but I can pay for therapy. I was like, something's wrong in that system. Right. And that's what I was like, as therapists, what can we do? And they said, it's not my responsibility. Fair. There's a lot of things that are not our responsibilities, the government's, but can we meet somewhere in the middle? Right.
Right. And since we are in this system, at least this is my biased. This is absolutely my bias. So you were talking about someone who was saying that they had to move in with somebody to afford their rent so that they could continue to do therapy. And we were talking about the systems that, yes, the government might control how the system works, or the healthcare system might control how the system works, but we're deeply involved in this system. So at least my biased opinion is that we can influence it. We can influence how we could change it and recreate it into something that's more equitable. I kind of want to hear you kind of think about that or talk through that.
Yeah, I think part of it, and for me, and I always have to share with my own piece around like my own relationship with my ancestors and the stories that have been told to me. So I think my interaction with the system is different than many, because my Nana told me how she was one of the first folks to integrate the school systems in Tampa. They lived on the first integrated street. So for me, it's ingrained that the system is not always going to do what it's supposed to do. That doesn't mean things don't need to get done. Well, I have to say, because I realize people have different perspectives. And so when I hear that, I'm like, things are possible when we do push against the system, or we have different things. Like, not only will people change, and this goes into like the IFS idea, where it's like, if our parts are able to feel freed from the burdens they have, then we're able to send this energy into the system and then they transform. The ways that we've unfortunately interacted with the capitalist system is to engage in more capitalism. So insurance is terrible. I'm not going to take insurance anymore. Okay. This part is terrible. I want more money. I can't afford to do the things that I would like to do, so I'm going to charge more. So I think in many ways we've lost the creativity in how to navigate this system, and have literally played the same game as the system. And unfortunately, the people who always get impacted at the end are the most marginalized and disenfranchised people. And that is my issue, is that the ideas that are coming up are always going to impact the people who need our services the most. And then they're left figured out, well, I guess I can't go to counseling. I guess I got to figure it out. But then there's no resources. Right. So my hope is that therapists, get paid, but why can't we think of other ways to support them? Like, can you give a list of coping strategies? Can you do like what you're doing, like a podcast, or even a video, or even do a group, right? Can we do different things to give them information? And that's the part that I was asking for in the video, which I was surprised there was pushback, because it's a win-win. Make whatever you would like to make, but make sure people who cannot afford that have access to those resources. Not just say that's not my responsibility.
Yeah. It's I give up. This is how it is. I'm just going to play the game how I need to play it, versus, okay, to shift it, it's actually going to take all of us doing micro to macro things to make it shift. There's a really good Facebook group that is about trying to bring us all together, at least the LMHC side, the licensed mental health counselor side, about what does it mean for us to really influence the healthcare system as it actually exists. I'll try to put it in the show notes so that folks can try to find it. But one of the things that they've been talking a lot about is VC capital and its influence on the creation of these large companies hoping to turn a massive profit, when for most people who are in private practice or running their own businesses, the margins are very, very, very small. Having run a group practice myself, I know that for a fact. Having in a solo practice now, I know that for a fact. The margins are very small. And so when you say, oh, like, I'm just going to charge what I need to charge to eat or to live the lifestyle I want, it actually puts us in a weaker position financially, I would argue. That when you start to diversify what kind of income that you can bring into your life, you can really impact that, what you said about the parts. You feel freer to do more service. It doesn't mean that when I say that we don't deserve to be paid.
Right.
It means that there is a system that is active, that has been built, that really makes it difficult for people to get the expensive education that we have and then be able to be paid the amount they need to be paid. I'm kind of curious, how do you think that that kind of built-in narrative, because I'm sure you heard it, but I won't make assumptions. So many of my colleagues, when they were in graduate school, don't expect to make a lot of money, don't expect financial security. The best you can hope for is becoming a supervisor in an agency. Like, I had a professor who said the working in private practice is working with the working well, which, as a person who's been doing this a long time and the specialties that I have, that is not at all the case. I really do think that there is the grander system of the capitalistic healthcare system influences this. I kind of would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as it relates to like when the narrative started, I can't even say I can recall like when it really took off, because I feel like there was a good period of time when this narrative was not the only narrative, or it wasn't pushed as much. I don't know if the pandemic. Yeah. Well, actually, let me actually think. I wonder if that was when I saw a transition, because this is the sad part. When you think about things like BetterHelp, or you think about these other entities that are coming in, we live in a supply-demand world. And what ended up happening right after the pandemic is we had a high demand and a low supply. Unfortunately, people respond in a business mindset, right? When there's a high high demand, low supply, this is a more profitable experience. And so I wonder if that is when, because I can't remember pre-2019, I don't remember seeing it to this extent, but when telehealth became a very popular way, the ease and flow of doing therapy kind of transitioned. I did see a lot more people even moving into online-only private practices. And so you start to see maybe it's not as hard. I can do this avenue and I can make more money. So I think it opened the door for a lot of people to realize they can do things differently and make more money and do less. Yeah. And I think that is what I've seen with the healthcare model as well, right? They said, well, now, even though there's these barriers, we can still be profitable even in this situation. So even there became telehealth visits across the board. So I think our focus just transitioned to, how do I still make money even though people are suffering? Because that was such a time we were all suffering. It wasn't let's slow down and make sure people were taken care of. It's like we still have to function financially. Yes. And I don't know if we've really come back from that. I don't know what it looks like for people who were in college or grad school during that time and how those conversations came up around what to do. But I think the ease and the opportunity of doing private practice or doing telehealth only became more open to a lot of people.
I think that's it is a fair question. I am an OG when it comes to telehealth. I started my private practice online entirely in 2017. A big part of the reason, at least for me, I won't speak for anybody else, was it was a way for me to make more money, but not from the client side, my side. Yeah. Because I don't have to pay an expensive property rent. I don't have to pay for really specific things that go with having an office. And so it does free up like financial ability for me. I don't have to pay for certain kinds of childcare. Yeah. There's just things I don't have to pay for because I'm working from home. Right. So I do think that you're onto something there. But again, the capital system rub, I think I think it's so hard for therapists to not take everything that we're going to say in this episode so personally. We're asking the questions of how do we indict the larger system? Yeah. How do we say, like, this system isn't working for us? And we're trying to serve so many more people with mental health conditions, so many more people. When we were during the pandemic and post the pandemic, we still have the same level of need and not enough of us to serve. And so how do we support us as a field, which there's a bunch of us who was doing direct clinical work through the entirety of the pandemic, like myself. and so many people trying to figure out how to teach in universities and provide services in universities online. Our world changed fundamentally, but the system didn't.
Yeah.
And so how do we think about it in a different way is the question that I think you and I are asking. Am I onto it, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think with any systemic change, and I mean, we do this as therapists. Let's start with how this developed, right? That's what we're missing. I think often in these conversations, I think many people go in and it's just like, I'm just a part of it. It's right. It's like, we actually, when we get to the root of it, and Dr. Jennifer Mullen talks so much about this in her book, Decolonizing Therapy, which is phenomenal. They don't open us up.
It's going in the show notes.
Yeah, I was like, I always got to plug her because her work is phenomenal. But when you read that, you're like, wow, we really are contributing to a whole kind of industrial complex, the mental health industrial complex, sometimes the prison industrial complex, and these profit-based systems. And if we are not aware of the root of what we're doing, we will easily replicate it. And that's what gets me fired up, because I was like, I wish we were critically thinking about this more. And sometimes we're not. And that's what ends up being missed. And honestly, I see a lot of therapists in private practice that doesn't say they're burned out and they're tired, even in private practice. And again, the response is then, well, let me see less clients. I'm going to see maybe 10 people. And then they're like, but I'm not making enough money. So let me raise my rates, right? Do we hear like the concern in that system? And if we call it out, then it's, I don't deserve to be paid. No, let's listen to what's happening. Like, this is a capital mindset. How do we ensure that you're supported, but it also doesn't leave people hanging? Because it's so sad to hear people say, hey, I have to stop going to a therapist I love because she raised her rates and now she doesn't take my insurance. And I've heard that so many times. And yes, we can call out the insurance system. We can call out the government. But if we're calling things out, we got to allow ourselves to be called out and see how we're contributing. And if we don't, we're going to keep perpetuating the issues that we want to see gone.
Yes. I think that there's a weird, strange place we have to sit inside of ourselves and go, okay, what is the system? How am I participating in it? And I don't think that necessarily means that you have to change your behavior immediately, because we're not asking people like, oh, close your private practice doors. Like, that's not, I think it's that all or nothing fearful thinking that people think that, like, when we're trying to like turn a system upside down, like, well, that means you're asking me to give up all these things. No, we need to think about it in an entirely different way. Like, if you're a burnt out therapist, you need to be able to take time off so that you can recover and come back to the field rather than leave the field entirely, which so many people did post-pandemic. They went and did other things because of what it was like to try to do that work through something that was terrifying to all of us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's the saddest piece again. Who ends up getting hurt the most? It's always the people. Right? So there's people needing the services, and the counselors are then burned out. We're all getting hit by the same system. That is the same system that drives counselors to private practice, because these community-based spaces, there's an influx and there's no room. So it's like, let's look and see how we can change the entire system bit by bit. But it has to start with where are we even at, proximity to it, right? Am I contributing to this in any way? And there are many therapists that are doing a phenomenal job, right? Doing pro bono or even sliding scales or even figuring out being in the community. It's just like, can we diversify how we show up? Which honestly is maybe a call to the profession. Maybe are we moving toward the different idea of what it means to be a counselor? Is it just this one-to-one office and what we were trained in grad school? Or is it something more, because the system is bigger, right? There's more people who need help that cannot access this method of what we do.
Exactly. I think the creativity and thinking of what else and how could we be helpful is something that requires us to think about our values in such a different way, and likely returning to the values that got us to the field at all. We all didn't go into grad school with the idea like, oh, I'm going to go out here and make $350 an hour. Like, most of us didn't go in with that idea. We went in with the idea of like, oh, this is fascinating to me, or I have reasons from my families of origin, or I have mental health issues myself, or I have so many reasons that I want to be helpful because of all of the things that I've seen in my life or I've seen in others' lives. And being able to be creative about how we help. The way that I think through it is I think, okay, can I offer more groups when I'm feeling a little toasty on my edges and I need to maybe reduce the number of individual clients that I'm seeing, have groups of similar issues that I could be seeing at regular intervals. I'm working on taking on a contract through the Department of Disabilities here in our state so that I can help do consult work. So it's less about the working with the individual clients, but I'm still helping in a different way and being paid for services. There are ways to do it. We don't have to only raise our fee or divorce ourselves entirely from insurance, because I think the argument that quite often gets made, and then we'll talk about how IFS could help us here. The insurance system for so many therapists gets to be toxic because they start billing insurance, and then there are many people who experience clawbacks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And there's so many people who can't afford a $10,000 withdrawal from their bank account that an insurance company has direct access to.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And so the fear that pushes therapists to operate from, I really do think influences how people engage with the system.
Absolutely.
So IFS is your wheelhouse. So how do you think IFS could really help therapists and clients navigate the processes and the pressures brought on by capitalism?
Yeah, so what you just spoke to is like a perfect avenue, because you said there's this fear, right, of what's going to happen in this regard. Clients may have that same fear. If I lose my insurance, I can't afford X, Y, and Z. Mm-hmm. So in IFS, we call these cultural legacy burdens, which are the burdens that are implicated to us from the system. So it's all the isms, the phobias, and capitalism is included in that. So it's the idea that our parts are not necessarily only responding to what's happening inside of us. They're responding to this system of what's happening to us. And in order to respond and be okay, right? Because if we actually take capitalism and just look at it for without our parts, that is so terrifying that if I become sick, ill, any capacity cannot show up, pay a bill, I will lose my home. I will lose my job. Mm-hmm. Potentially, I could lose my ability to feed myself. If you might be in a relationship, depending on the needs or the expectations, you can lose your relationship. That is so terrifying, right? To anyone.
Yes.
So we develop these protectors inside that are like, I got to do whatever I can to make sure that doesn't happen. Just like you said, it's like, well, if I raise my rates enough or I stop taking insurance, I don't have to deal with these clawbacks. Or maybe there's less worry of that, right? So all of our parts are on fire in regards to how do I get through this? Or if you're on the other side in your community mental health, you have these parts of you that become hyperproductive. Because if I don't produce very well, then I'm not meeting my quotas. And then therefore I'm going to be penalized. I could then lose my job. If I'm not seeing enough people, how am I going to pay? So again, all of our parts are showing up in this world to be able to figure out how do I navigate through. In IFS, it's the idea that how do we relieve these parts from their burdens? And it's one, acknowledging that they need to be here. And why do they need to be here? How do we even know these parts are showing up, right? And this is the thing for all of us therapists to be like, oof, what's happening right inside? For me, I realized that I had a part of me that was super productive in a way that became extreme, because I felt like, I am responsible for every college student's mental health. My goodness, if anybody falls through the crack, what did I do wrong, right? That led to me missing lunch. That led to me taking as many as possible, not having my own boundaries, feeling terrified if I have boundaries, if something bad is going to happen, right? So I had to realize like, that responsibility in itself, that burden, is not all my responsibility. Right. When I was able to relieve that sense of burden that I'm not expected to perform and do all of this for the sake of making an institution money and everybody okay, what didn't change is that I just stopped caring. It's I could care with intention. I actually had choice. I could be creative. I could actually be more curious about what's happening. I could get more connected. I had clarity. Like all these things, which is what we call like the 8 C's of like self-energy and IFS. So then we actually could make long-lasting changes and not feel the burden of what's connected to that. So I think we think about capitalism, one, we have to recognize what parts of us are holding those burdens. And that goes so deep. I mean, I can't imagine there's any person alive that does not have a part of them impacted by capitalism. Like it just goes so far back. And when we think about generational trauma, that's been passed down, especially the industrial revolution. Like we go like, and I'm in Iowa, it's very rural. It's so deep in our blood. I always say capitalism and racism are like Siamese twins. Like they are just so entrenched in all of us. But when you're able to release the burdens that have been inflicted on you from the system, there's more room to figure out how to respond. It's almost like you have this space to be like, wow, I don't have to do it this way. What would I rather do instead? And that's what we usually would do in IFS. Like once this part realizes like, hey, if you actually didn't have to do this particular job, what would you do? All these opportunities come. And I wonder if more therapists were asked, like, if you didn't have to do your practice this way, like if you weren't worried about capitalism and money, what would your practice actually look like? And I imagine there might be so many other ideas right, that come up.
Yes.
So that's what it could look like through IFS. Like, let's release these burdens, right? Doesn't mean we don't interact with the system.
It's incredibly powerful what you're describing.
Yeah,
you're describing something incredibly powerful. Freedom.
Yes.
And with space comes the ability to make decisions. DBT tells us that from our wise mind, right?
Exactly.
And I think you're right onto it. And IFS really could help us shift how we're thinking about it clinically for ourselves and for how we're serving others. Now, I wonder how other identities might be more impacted. You've already brought up the racism and capitalism being deeply intertwined twins, right? So, but what other, I feel like there are specific identities that really do suffer here. I want to say like cis women and any gender diverse person as a clinician and as a client, right? You're with it. Then we're in a field that is super cis women heavy, right? And on average, we are paid less than a wide variety of other fields. And our insurance reimbursement is also less than someone who has a bachelor's degree doing 30 minutes of counseling in a hospital. So I think we should consider too more of what you were saying about racism and capitalism being twins. What other identities are impacted, do you feel?
Oh, absolutely. The first one that popped in my head after you were sharing was like ableism.
Yes.
I was like, that is the way the capitalism is like work yourself so hard to make as much as possible when your body is literally not able to do that mentally, physically.
Correct.
Then you're not able to practice the act of capitalism, which therefore then you're discarded. You're less than. So there's something wrong, right? Ageism. The idea that there's a certain group of people that all of a sudden they just have less worth in society because they're not able to perform the acts of capitalism. So those are some that come to mind. Intersectionality is always going to be, when you add in that layer of life, you hold the multiple. I mean, you already hit it with sexism and the tiers. You could easily see that, like who actually gets rewarded for capitalism and the type of behaviors you have to engage in and what they more align with, right? And then when you have, because capitalism rewards the rich get richer. So there are certain people who are not given even opportunities to grow, right? But then they'll see, I mean, we're about to witness an election and this conversation is coming up. Why are we having a conversation? You know, so
my schedule that week, is so packed. And the week after, so packed already. We are in October as we record this. It is already full.
I think I'm told people, I was like, any external meetings outside of the clients I'm seeing, I was like, I think I'm pushing everything back to the third week of November because I was like, I have no mental state I'm going to be in. But again, I think those are some of the, when we think about identities, it's like, then it's coupled because then you're dealing with capitalism on top of the expectations and the stereotypes and discrimination from all these other identities. And that's why capitalism sometimes gets pushed to the side a little bit. And I think there was a comment that someone said, they like capitalism. It's like almost like capitalism is that, that cousin that does all the sneaky stuff but then everybody else gets in trouble and they're still like the best cousin that shows up. I was like, there's no way you like capitalism. If you actually knew what it was, I was like, you said, I want to make as much money as possible. I said, no, like we're missing the understanding. Capitalism is not, you want to make money. It is at the expense of other people. And I think we've missed that. We've missed that. And that's why I think we get upset about it. It's like, make money, please, not at the expense of other people. That is like key, right? That I think gets missed in these dialogues when we talk about it.
Yes, absolutely. The thing that I have always envisioned in my head that I'm going to show the people who have ever listened to my stuff ever know what a nerd I am. I love Star Trek Next Generation from back in the day. Deanna Troy was the counselor on the bridge of the Enterprise. Now, this entire world was created with the idea that we were over at capitalism. So everybody was exploring space because they wanted to explore space. And they had a counselor on the bridge to keep everybody's mental health in check on the bridge as one of the primary leaders. And she was also, by the way, the only one that could make the captain take a day off, whether he liked it or not, which I loved. I was like, get him. Get him. But also, like, that idea, what would you do if it didn't mean that you would lose your house, you wouldn't get the food you need, you could take care of your families, if you didn't have to consider that, the freedom that gives you, but also what could that system look like? I'm kind of curious. So in my head, I go to Star Trek. What does that world look like in your head?
So I'm honored to say, like, I feel like I'm living a little bit of it. So which I think why I like working out of college. So it looks like community engagement, right? Bringing therapy to people, workshops. It actually looks as small as saying hello. Like, so we partner, we do like therapy dogs. It like bringing community in. So I now know it's like we have all these resources and everybody's getting connected to everybody. It also just looks like being able to do fun things, right? In the work that we do. It looks like my sorority, we did a Black mental health conference. Why? Because there was a lot of people that needed it. Just people coming together with ideas, connecting with other people, saying this is our vision, and just offering this once a year thing just to see if people want to be a part of it. Right. So it's, for me, it's like, one is taking a risk, which is why I love IFS too, because sometimes people think, taking risky behaviors, like we categorize that. IFS is the idea that once you're released of some of those burdens, you get in healthy risk taking. It's like, I'm going to try this. I don't know. Right. It's okay to make mistakes. Let's see how it lands with other people. It's really getting out of your comfort zone, but not leaving your window of tolerance. Right. And so when I think of that world, it's the idea that somebody can walk to, let's say, even a grocery store, because I've gone to grocery stores that wear my badge. And I'm connecting somebody to counseling there. Just for like, hey, you're a therapist? Yeah, that's fine. Hey, actually, here's a place you can get connected. It's almost like where counseling just becomes, and therapy and mental health just becomes so accessible in the way that we act, the way we operate. People aren't afraid to ask for it and are aware of all the different places that they can go. There's a list of pro bono. There's a list of private pay, because some people may need, there are certain jobs that it would make a lot of sense why they do not want that on their medical record. So everybody has a piece of the pie that they need, where it's not as difficult. If it's somebody, let's say you have flyers on the bus stop, right? Where it's like, hey, here are 5 or 15 things that you can do if you're feeling doubtful, if you're feeling overwhelmed. Because at least when I work with college students, a lot of the research states that they want more self-help. I can't imagine there's not a lot of people in the world that would like to be able to take care of themselves. Right? So it actually looks like youth therapy as a resource, but right now there's a gap between the people who need access and the therapists who need clients. Let's acknowledge that piece. We have all these people in between of like, well, what do you do? Right? What are the people who are like, I just want support, right? I just want to know some tools that I can do to help myself. Social media is fulfilling that gap, right? So as my vision is like, there's so many people connecting with their unique talent, skills, abilities. And it's not focused specifically on finances. It's focused specifically on let's get the service back. And everybody has access to it, regardless of their abilities. I'm going to say regardless of their abilities, regardless of, because that's a whole piece too, right? Therapy sometimes aligns with a certain neurotypical mindset, right? So everybody has access to what they need.
It's win, 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 and no one loses.
The system.
And it's the different system can exist without the idea of somebody having to lose and someone having to not get access. I worked, you and I were talking before we started recording, I worked in a community college mental health counseling center, and it was very similar to what you're talking about. Being able to offer psychoeducation groups and being able to offer things that aren't necessarily this very specific model, but allows people to get services from a wide variety of backgrounds without necessarily having to pay for it all of the time, or that having to be their first thought.
Yes, their first thought.
And I think we talked about how the pandemic impacted therapists' mindsets, but I also think the pandemic increased the cost of everything so much that it also created pressure in such a complete blanket across the population, at least in the United States, and I know in other countries too. I'm kind of curious. I do want to speak directly to therapists who are feeling this tension between wanting to provide this accessible dream care that you and I kind of have in our heads, right?
Yep.
But needing to learn a living wage. What can we say to them?
Yeah.
And I think it's probably going to be rooted in IFS for you.
Yeah, there's always a part of me that's like, how do I want to use it? Yes. So the first thing that comes to my mind is reconnecting with why, like you mentioned earlier, why you did this in the first place. The moment we lose sight of the purpose is often where we find ourselves doing things that we don't feel the best about, we feel lost in it. And there are so many parts of me that really, truly believe that counselors are not going in intentionally to try to exploit the people we work with. I fully believe that. And what ends up happening is we become so individualistic and we get lost in that. So if there is a counselor like, well, how do I do it? What do I do? Get connected with people who also want to do that. Because that's usually where I see things transform, is the moment you talk to others, they're often going to have another idea. And then you don't have to do it by yourself, because if you try to do any kind of social justice work, which this would be social justice work, by yourself, it won't last long. And then you're going to be burned out, and then you're going to charge your prices higher because you're going to feel like, well, now I need my time back. Okay. But first, like, that is going to be the biggest, is getting in a community. There's so many therapy co-ops I'm hearing about these days, therapy collectives. That's a common thing around here in Des Moines. Have those kind of conversations. Like, how can we reach the people who can't afford our services? Start with that question, right? That's going to give you the temperature in the room and see, like, are those people who can handle or want to have that conversation? In my work, I've seen so many people who really do want to. It's hard finding those people to get connected. And allow that group to be one where you're thinking about actionable steps. We don't have to solve Rome in a day or whatever they say. You don't have to overcome it. Start with something as simple. Can you make a little card or a bookmark that has 5 breathing strategies you can do when you feel anxious or overwhelmed? That you can do on Canva, which is a tax write-off for many businesses that use Canva. Make that and then pass them out, right? They don't have to be these grand ideas. Work up to something. Or it could be the people that are on your wait list. Can you maybe send some tips, some tools, rather than just allowing them to get into you? Maybe links to podcasts, TikTok, send it maybe periodically. It doesn't have to be something you overcommit to, but just start thinking about what else can I do to support the people. And that's literally what this whole conversation was about, or the whole video was about. Can we think outside of the work that we do in the individual, so that way we do not just succumb to a capitalistic system in our work?
Exactly. I think you are offering the idea that if we take a step back and really connect with those internal values, which no matter what therapeutic perspective you operate it from, there is at least one conversation somewhere about value.
Yeah.
I come from the ACT and compassion focused therapy world, and that is what it is all about.
Yes.
And I think you do, when you connect with that, it does make the other decisions more clear, and you can make different decisions than just raising your rate. Because the reality is, where people live across the country, that rate may not be sustainable in that area. And you are asking therapists to feel, for lack of a better way to put it, crazy when they're not getting any clients because they're trying to be self-pay alone at $200 an hour in a rural area that can't sustain it. It's incredibly difficult, the conversation that we are having right now. And so all of y'all who are listening, if you're feeling threatened by it and you start going, but what about it? I'm not getting off that insurance panel, or I'm not walking away from private practice. We're not saying any of that. No. We're saying, what is the reason why you got in the field? And how do you figure out a way to work in this field that doesn't necessarily have to engage with taking from others? Did I summarize it right? Did I get my summarizing skill correct, Kayla?
Absolutely. The biggest is, can counselors become a part of the community in just various ways? And this is my expectation, I wish, for doctors as well, right? I was like, in healthcare, I wish that we were more engaged in the community, because what ends up happening with the power imbalance is we expect people to come to us when they're feeling unwell, but then they come to us and experience harm and they can't afford us. So then what happens? What happens to all the people that cannot access our resources? Do they just go away? Like, they don't. They become citizens still in our society that are impacted by this world. And that's at the core of everything I do, is suicide prevention, right? So I'm often thinking about the people who feel discarded, who feel like they're not able to connect. And I was like, we don't want to lose those people also, right? And so it's just more of like, let's just get curious. If there's anything we start with, just get curious. See, and again, you don't have to be
Yes.
a podcast host, right? You don't have to be a renowned public speaker. I truly believe every person has something to offer. And if we don't feel like you have something to offer,
Yes.
that's another place to start. It's like, when did we lose the sight? Because every
Yes.
child has some vision of something impossible that feels possible to them.
Yes.
They feel like they can be a butterfly.
Yes.
Right. So that's why I was like, I believe that
That's
it's
right.
there. Right. So let's just get back to being creative and see what comes up from there.
Absolutely. What does it mean to be creative? It is that's actually the rule personally that I use for anything that I put out content wise. If this doesn't feel creative, this feels like continued like me chasing a dollar, then I am not in the right place, because I lose it entirely. I lose patience with it entirely. I'm exhausted by it entirely. And so if I sit with, okay, what is this giving to my community? That is an entirely different question. That is a question that can have energy in it if the gasoline is creativity.
Yeah, absolutely.
What's your gasoline of creativity these days for yourself?
I love to I've been dreaming a lot more. I tell all my staff, they know, it's like there's no such thing as a ceiling. I don't believe in ceilings. I believe in that's somebody else's ceiling. We just need more resources and time. So I've been allowing myself just to dream about what could happen. IFS, honestly, that is one of my biggest, like when I'm in an IFS space, like with other folks too, all of a sudden there's something that opens up inside of me. It's just this energy of just feeling like, wow, this is possible, which I guess boils down to just connection. The more I'm connecting with people, talking to people, that's why I loved how you started. We were listening to your ideas. Like, it just makes me feel like there's so much hope, right? Because when you're not connected and you're on social media, you're watching the news, it feels like we're doom and gloom. But the more I'm interacting with other people, it's like, no, there's hope in this. Oh, it's great to meet people. So those are the things. And of course, I have a little one, so that always keeps me with my creativity. It's like, oh, how do I connect with someone who the language is not there yet. She's only like 15 months. So it's like, yeah, let's figure out how to have fun. Let's play in ways that make sense to you, because literally nothing I will say or do will fully make sense. So that has been a huge, huge piece of gasoline. Right. Yeah. But how about you?
I just love that you have a 15-month-old, because I have a soon-to-be 19-year-old and a freshly 12-year-old in September. So we are on the on-ramp to puberty. And which is, I enjoy this part of life very much. Most parents are very, very concerned. I have to have different conversations with my son. I have to be like, no, you can't teach the sex ed class. You need to let the teacher teach the sex ed class. I know you know a lot, but I know you want to share it and you want to support your friends and you want them to be able to know what you know, but this is one area you gotta chill. And I warned his teachers. But the things that make me feel creative, I think now, are when I am using the things that I know I'm good at and getting to use them in a way that makes somebody else's light bulb go off.
Yeah.
So I'm one of the hugely creative places I feel right now. I'm actually getting to teach essentially human sexuality at my alma mater, which is a Presbyterian Christian school.
Okay.
And it is a mountain that I have always wanted to climb, because it is, if anybody knows, like if you grew up in any of the Christian circles or in Christian churches, sexuality is not an easy topic. And so getting to see the light bulbs go off in these bachelor's level students and getting them to start to have this education so they don't feel shame when they go into their relationships, when they go into marriages, if that's what they want, when they go into the, like, getting to do that makes me feel very, very creative. And I love to think about new ways of blowing their mind like that. That absolutely is really, really fun for me. But I think my family keeps me grounded too. I love that you have a 14-month-old. That is such a fun age. But it's just such a fun age.
It is very fun. She learned yesterday she can pick her boogers and put them on us. So we've been navigating through that. It keeps me on my toes.
How do we navigate? And they taste funny and they feel weird. Oh yeah.
Don't want to reject her. Yes. I find myself saying a lot of things I never thought. Like, no, you cannot put that in your mouth. like that.
No, don't touch that and then put it in your mouth.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I wish I could tell you that it gets different. That actually is, it just gets different. It's not the same conversation sometimes. Sometimes it's the same conversation and you're just like, you're 12.
Right. Yeah.
If you ever want to kiss another person ever, you really need to stop picking your boogers and eating them. You really need to stop.
Yes, I'm fully aware she's going to be a run for our money. I would say she's going to be like our little social justice baby. I feel it. Just her energy.
Oh, yeah.
Which means that's the rest of the home.
Absolutely.
If I want her to be that way, I got to allow her to push our buttons a little bit and push against our rules, right? Or else she won't feel comfortable doing it outside the house. So.
Right. I just so appreciate this conversation. It has been incredibly meaningful to me. I hope it has been for our listeners. I can't imagine it hasn't. But before we completely wrap up, what bottom basement advice would you give to therapists who are struggling to deal with the pressure of capitalism for their work?
Yeah, I would say if you're struggling, that means the system is working. So you can't do this burnt out, right? So making sure it starts honestly in little things like taking care of yourself. I used to never take a vacation because I felt like I had to be so productive. Start with taking some breaks and then work from there, because we can't do this if your mind has no space. Like you said, no gasoline to be creative. We got to have that space. It also knowing that it started long before you, to release that shame. Like we all participated in it, right? But it's one of those things like when you know better, now you do better. So don't allow the shame of like, oh my goodness, I've been doing this, to hinder you from doing more, right? Allow that, if anything, to propel you to start getting creative and take your time. It took me 4 years, at least in the role I'm in, to actually figure out, okay, now we have it working, right? So start with at least a few goals and then pick ones that feel tangible, right? Because if you try to do everything all at once, that is going to send you overwhelmed. And when we think about from a parts perspective, that's going to activate so many parts, right? Because the root of these parts are trying to protect from, houselessness, food insecurity, like all these really big things that deal with survival. So if we try to just change everything at once, your whole inner system might say, hey, I don't know if this is okay. And then we double down. So just go step by step and build community.
Yes. And quick comment for Kayla in the TikTok comments. I'm just going to say.
I mean, they can. I'm with it. You saw, hold up now. There's a lot of people who would say a lot. It's like, listen, I was actually in a good mood. And they say, you're coming when I was like, I'm not. Like, I understand people are burned out by these systems who also probably practice capitalism, but the response to capitalism is not more capitalism. That is a hill that I'm going to die. So please do what you need to do to make your money, to make yourself
I will
feel
stand
good.
there with you.
Yes. I highly recommend do not tie your income to your self-worth. That is a slippery slope of lack of satisfaction ever. Tie it to what your means are and what you need to have the life that you feel you would like, not your worth, right? Capitalism doesn't determine our worth.
It does not. We, especially in this profession, we have taken on, for many of us at the beginning of our careers, we have decided to take on some of the hardest work, which is to help people sit with their pain. And I just am so grateful for you coming and sharing your insights with us today, Kayla. How can people find you in this big old world? I'm going to keep following you on TikTok.
Well, yeah, now we have a nice connection, right? And thank you. It's been such a pleasure to be with you in this space and talk with someone else who gets it. Like, I love that. But people can find me in two ways. They can find me on my website at questionkaylallc.com, or you can find me on all social media platforms at Question Kayla. That includes Substack, Instagram, and TikTok, and YouTube. My YouTube is not as active, so.
Yeah. There's only so much we can do. So thank you again for being here. Folks, everything that you heard today, any of the resources will be in the show notes. And if you would like a CEU for this incredible conversation, please join us at 2XLabs. We're so glad to have you, Kayla. Everybody have a wonderful week, and we will see you next time.